Well, folks, I couldn't believe my eyes that morning when a poor judge, though none of us knew she was a federal judge back then, standing in her front yard, watching her gorgeous Victorian home turn to ashes. That old place was a beauty, with its wild purple trim and those roses her grandma planted ages ago. And who was standing there smug as you please, sipping her fancy coffee like she'd just won the lottery? Linda Harrington, that HOA tyrant from next door. Oh, she thought she'd finally gotten the upper hand in their little neighborhood war. Little did she know who she was messing with. I'm dying to know how far Linda's gonna push before Judge shows her true colors. Where y'all watching this from? Drop it below. It all kicked off like any other day. Judge was out there on her grandma's creaky old porch swing, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise turn the sky all pink and pretty over that purple-trimmed Victorian. That's when Linda came strutting down the sidewalk, power walking like she owned the whole street. She had an envelope in her manicured claws, gripping it like it was the key to Fort Knox. I've seen that look on her face before. Same one she gets at those ridiculous HOA meetings she started hosting in her tacky McMansion next door. Judge's stomach must have dropped, 'cause mine sure did, watching Linda shove that envelope in her mailbox. Then, get this, she lingered, snapping pictures of Judge's front yard with her phone like some kinda HOA detective. Those wild roses of Judge's grandma were blooming like crazy, all messy and beautiful, nothing like Linda's boring, perfect boxwood hedges. You could tell Linda hated every single petal. Now, I peeked over later when Judge opened that envelope. Couldn't help myself. Inside was what Linda called an exciting opportunity. It was a fancy invite to join her shiny new HOA, complete with a glossy brochure showing a bunch of beige houses with matching mailboxes. Membership fee? $5,000 up front, plus $350 a month. But that wasn't the real kicker. Attached was this insane list of mandatory property modifications. Paint over that purple trim Judge's grandma loved. Rip out the rose garden for some approved bushes, and take down those antique wind chimes that V been singing Judge to sleep since she was a kid. Can you believe it? I watched Judge peek out her window as Linda marched back home, already yapping on her phone. Yes, I just delivered the final invitation, I heard her say. All fake sweet like syrup gone bad. She'll have to join now. Hers is the last holdout on the street. I could practically hear her smirking. Once we get her place in line, this neighborhood's value will skyrocket. Made my skin crawl, I tell ya. That night, Judge wasn't backing down. She marched right over to Linda's, invitation in hand. Linda's doorbell chimed, "We are the champions." Of course it did, and she answered wearing some silly neighborhood watch captain badge, grinning like she thought she was Miss Congeniality. Judge kept it cool as a cucumber, saying, "I've reviewed your invitation, and I need to decline. This house has been in my family for 3 generations, and I'm keeping its history intact." Linda's smile dropped faster than a kid's ice cream on a hot day. "You don't understand," she snapped, leaning in close. "This isn't really an invitation. The HOA's already registered. Your property's surrounded. You have to join." That's when Judge pulled out some old property maps she'd dug up. "Actually," she said, calm as ever, "my deed predates any HOA nonsense. I don't have to do squat." Linda's face went redder than a tomato in July. "Listen here," she hissed, dropping the nice act. "This neighborhood's changing. Progress is coming. If you don't get on board, things might get tough. Accidents happen to houses that don't meet code. Citations pile up. Fines add up." Judge just stared her down. "Is that a threat, Mrs. Harrington?" Linda backpedaled quick, plastering that fake smile back on. "Of course not. I'm just worried about your property value. Old houses like yours, electrical issues, structural problems. It'd be awful if something happened, 'cause you wouldn't modernize." I saw Linda's husband lurking behind her, phone in hand, looking shifty. Something about him gave me the creeps. Judge nodded all polite-like and turned to leave, but Linda wasn't done. "1 week," she hollered after her. "You've got 1 week to rethink before the HOA board talks enforcement." As Judge walked home, I noticed a few new faces peering out from their windows. Linda's HOA cronies, no doubt. This wasn't going to end with a polite no thanks. I could feel it. That night, Judge got smart, set up security cameras all around her place, documenting everything. Good thing, too, 'cause my gut was screaming Linda was just warming up. What I didn't know then was this wasn't about property values or purple trim. In all my years of watching folks bicker, I'd never seen anyone like Linda. As Judge drifted off to those wind chimes, she had no clue this was the start of a war that'd change everything, and that her beautiful Victorian would be the first thing to go. But Linda, she picked the wrong target. She just didn't know it yet. Well, let me tell you, things started heating up fast around here. It was barely dawn when I heard Linda's shrill voice piercing the quiet outside my window. "Look at those hideous purple trims. They're ruining our property values," she squawked. I peeked through my curtains, and there she was, leading her little posse of HOA busybodies on what they called their morning inspection. My heart just about broke watching them swarm Judge's place. Poor thing didn't know what hit her. They were snapping pictures of every inch of that beautiful Victorian, her grandma's pride and joy. I could see Judge trying to sip her coffee on her porch swing, but those whispers carried right across the lawn. "Did you see those ancient wind chimes? Not HOA approved," one of them hissed. "And those roses, 3 inches taller than regulation." I swear, every day brought a new complaint, each one dumber than the last. Pretty soon, they started slapping bright orange warning letters all over Judge's front door, made-up violations that didn't exist till Linda's HOA came along. That heritage rose garden her grandma planted? Suddenly a neighborhood nuisance. The Victorian purple trim, you know, the stuff tourists use to stop and photograph? Their number one enemy. One Tuesday morning, I caught Linda out there measuring Judge's grass with a ruler like some kind of lawn cop. 11.5 inches, she crowed to her sidekick Deborah, who was scribbling away in a notebook like it was evidence for a murder trial. "That's 3.5 over code." Judge strolled out, coffee in hand, cool as ever. "You're trespassing on private property," she said, firm but polite, keeping her big secret under wraps. Linda just smirked and kept snapping pics with her phone. Didn't faze her one bit. Then the harassment got real creative. They'd send landscapers roaring in at 7 a.m. sharp on Saturdays, mowers and leaf blowers loudest right by Judge's bedroom window naturally. Anonymous complaints to code enforcement started popping up weekly. Every time, Judge would calmly show the officials her historic property papers, and I'd watch Linda stewing from her window, fuming like a kettle about to boil over. Next came the psychological games. Linda started holding HOA meetings in her driveway, right outside Judge's home office. I'd hear him yammering about how some people were dragging down the neighborhood's reputation, how certain houses needed to be dealt with for the greater good. Judge's security cameras caught M testing her patience too, letting their dogs turn her yard into a toilet, then acting all shocked when she showed M the footage. "Oh, my precious Bentley would never." Linda gasped, clutching her pearls, while that overgrown golden doodle dropped another steaming gift on the lawn. The breaking point hit during their big annual block party. Judge wasn't invited, of course, but I could hear everything from my porch. Linda was blabbing loud enough for the whole street, glancing at Judge's house while she announced plans to revitalize the neighborhood. "Some older properties just don't fit our community vision anymore," she said, all smug. That's when I noticed folks sneaking around, taking pictures of Judge's foundation, muttering about structural concerns. Judge didn't flinch, though. She just kept documenting every letter, every photo, every fake complaint, filing it all away like a pro. When they installed those blinding security lights aimed right at her bedroom windows, she added light pollution to her growing stack of evidence. That gal's got patience. Her grandma must have taught her well. I could tell she was waiting for the perfect moment. Then one night, I saw something on her security footage that made my blood run cold. 2 HOA board members were poking around her property line markers, whispering about easement regulations. I've seen that look before. They were cooking up something big. What they didn't know was Judge had spent her whole career handling folks who thought they were untouchable. As I watched Linda's crew huddle in her driveway that evening, I wondered how long Judge would hold off before dropping the hammer. I never dreamed I'd catch Linda and 2 of her HOA cronies sneaking around Judge's place at midnight. But there they were, lit up by her kitchen light, when she got up for a glass of water. My jaw dropped when I saw the chemical sprayers in their hands, aimed right at her grandma's century-old rose garden. "What do you think you're doing?" Judge called out from her porch, phone already recording. Linda jumped like a cat on a hot tin roof, but plastered that fake smile back on quick. "Oh, we're just helping eliminate these invasive species," she cooed, still spraying those roses like it was no big deal. "The HOA has strict rules about non-native plants. If you just join us, we could handle these issues properly." I could see Judge's wheels turning even from my window. This wasn't just about roses or rules anymore. Linda had crossed a line, and I had a feeling she was about to find out who she'd been poking all this time. Well, I'll be darned if that night didn't set my nerves on edge. I saw Judge march right up to Linda and her midnight posse, her blood boiling, but her voice steady as a rock. "Those aren't invasive species, Linda," she said, cool and sharp. "They're heritage Victorian roses, planted by my grandma back in 1960. I've got the original paperwork and the Gardening Society registration to prove it." The other HOA cronies shuffled their feet, looking uneasy, but Linda? Oh, she didn't budge. "Well, someone complained about the smell," she sniffed, adjusting her fancy designer pajamas like she was on a runway. "And those thorns? A safety hazard for kids walking by." Judge wasn't having it. "On my private property, behind my fence," she shot back, flipping on her security lights. "The property line's marked clear as day. You're trespassing." That's when Greg, Linda's husband, slunk out of the shadows. Big OL, retired police sergeant. Thinks he can scare anyone with that gravelly voice. Now, let's not throw accusations around," he drawled. "We're just trying to keep up neighborhood standards. Nobody wants to live next to a jungle." I was peeking through my curtains across the street. Yep, me, Mrs. Calloway, couldn't resist, and my heart sank. See, they'd bullied me into joining their blasted HOA last month after some late-night visits of their own. My beautiful rock garden? Gone in days, replaced with Linda's boring shrubs. I knew Judge was in for it now. Come morning, those roses were toast, petals black and shriveled like something out of a horror flick. But Linda messed up big time. She'd let slip their little game, targeting anyone who wouldn't bow to the HOA. Judge wasn't fooling around after that. I heard she spent her lunch break digging through records at the county office. And sure enough, every house that had said no to the HOA ended up with accidents or code violations till they sold. That afternoon, she rigged up some high-def security cameras, tucking em sneaky-like among her remaining plants. Smart move. 'Cause that evening, here comes Linda, parading potential buyers past her house. "Oh, this eyesore will be dealt with soon," she announced, loud as a foghorn. "We've got ways of handling difficult residents." I knew trouble was brewing. The next week was pure chaos. Judge's mailbox got knocked over 3 times. Coincidence, my foot. Anonymous noise complaints rolled in on days she wasn't even home. Code enforcement officers showed up daily, poking around, finding zilch, but they kept coming back. Her garbage bins vanished, only to turn up somewhere violating HOA rules. Judge didn't flinch, though. She documented every little thing, building her case quiet as a mouse. But Linda's crew got cocky. They started holding HOA meetings right in front of her house, pointing out every so-called flaw to newbies. "This property's tanking home values," Linda declared, waving her designer handbag like a battle flag. "But don't worry, it won't be a problem much longer." Then came the last straw. I caught em on Judge's cameras, messing with her historic fence posts, loosening em up while pretending to measure the sidewalk. "Once these fail inspection," Linda whispered to her minions, "she'll have to replace the whole thing with our approved model. Thousands of bucks, unless she joins the HOA, of course." That night, Judge spotted something weird on her footage. The HOA inspection team always had someone snapping pics of her electrical boxes, gas lines, all the utilities. They were casing the joint, plain and simple, looking for weak spots. I could tell she was putting the puzzle together, and it wasn't pretty. She knew she had to move fast, but she wasn't tipping her hand just yet. What she didn't know, heck, what I didn't know, was that Linda had already kicked off a plan that had turned everything upside down. I was sipping my morning tea when the news hit. Judge had just sentenced some crooked CEO to prison. Big case, front page stuff. Paper said the courtroom went dead quiet. Then her clerk Isabel burst in, white as a ghost. "Your Honor, your house, it's on fire." Judge threw off her robes and bolted down the courthouse steps. I saw her peel out, and my stomach sank. 15 minutes later, I could see the black smoke from 3 blocks away, curling up like a bad omen. By the time she screeched to a stop, firefighters were battling a full-on inferno. That gorgeous purple trim her grandma painted, swallowed by angry orange flames. The heat hit like a punch, and those old wooden beams groaned like they were crying. 3 generations of her family's history, poof, up in smoke. Through the haze, I spotted Linda in her driveway, decked out in designer yoga pants, sipping her overpriced coffee like it was just another Tuesday. Her blonde hair gleamed in the sun as she chatted with her HOA buddies, pointing at the fire and whispering like they were at a show. They didn't even try to hide it. The satisfaction oozing off was thicker than the smoke. I knew right then, this wasn't an accident. And Linda, she just lit a match she couldn't put out. Well, I couldn't peel my eyes away when Chief Ramirez trudged over to Judge, his face all grim and serious. "Ma'am," he said, "looks like an electrical fire. These old houses, their wiring can be a real hazard." But Judge wasn't buying it, and neither was I. She just had her annual electrical checkup the day before. Everything up to code, spick and span, like always. She'd made darn sure of it after Linda started flapping her gums at the last town meeting about unsafe historic properties. Then it hit her like a bolt from the blue. Those security cameras. I saw her yank out her phone, hands trembling like leaves in a storm, trying to pull up the footage. Blank screen. Nada. They'd stopped recording at 3 a.m. sharp, 4 hours before the fire kicked off. Coincidence? Not a chance in heck. As her house burned, Judge stood there, memories flashing through her mind. I could see it in her eyes. Baking cookies with her grandma in that kitchen, throwing her law school grad party in the garden, her first day as a judge, all turning to ash cause she wouldn't kiss Linda's HOA ring. Through the gawking crowd, she clocked 2 familiar faces, Greg Harrington and Mark Reynolds, HOA bigwigs, trying to blend in like they were just nosy neighbors. But their shoes gave them away. Same work boots I'd seen on her footage last week when her roses got trashed. Now they were caked in fresh mud. Or was it ash? Linda strutted over, fake concern dripping off her like cheap perfume. "Oh, this is just terrible," she cooed. "If only you joined our HOA. We've got strict safety rules. But you were so stubborn about keeping things historic." She sneered that last word like it was a cuss, taking a slow, smug sip of her coffee. Judge bit her tongue, till it bled. I could tell, but she held back. Not yet. Instead, she watched Linda whip out her phone, typing away. Minutes later, I overheard some neighbor blabbing about a hot deal on prime land popping up in some fancy real estate group. The fire crew finally tamed the blaze, but it was too late. Those stunning Victorian windows? Shattered. The hand-carved porch railings? Charred to nubs. The roof? Half collapsed. A century of history, gone in hours. As Judge stood there, smoke curling into the morning sky, I saw a fire light up in her. Linda thought she'd won, thought she'd crushed her. But oh, she'd just poked the wrong bear. Judge pulled out her phone and made 3 calls right then and there. One to an FBI pal, one to a state attorney contact, and one to a private investigator she trusted. I caught Linda eyeing her, a flicker of worry crossing that smug face. Good. Let her sweat. 'Cause Judge's real power wasn't in that house. It was in justice. While the sun climbed higher, Judge picked up a scorched scrap of purple trim. Her grandma always said you've got to lose everything sometimes to find the guts to fight back. Staring at Linda's gloating mug one last time, she knew what was next. But first, she had to figure out how deep this HOA rot went. Standing in the ashes, she made a promise. I could feel it, turning her grief into a mission. Linda started prancing around, spreading hogwash that Judge torched her own place for insurance money. Meanwhile, Judge was pulling strings to unravel Linda's whole rotten empire. Her first big break came from an old law school buddy, now a real estate investigator. He found something fishy. Every house that mysteriously burned in our county over the past 5 years got snapped up by the same shell company, owned by Linda's sister-in-law. Judge's hand shook as she dug into property records, each page screaming a pattern too neat to be chance. She hired a PI who tracked down old neighbors who'd lost their homes. Same story every time. Join the HOA or face nonstop harassment, then accidents or fires. Most gave up, selling for peanuts to Linda's investment group. One old guy broke down sobbing, telling how he lost his family photos in a shady garage fire the day after saying no. The real bombshell dropped from Linda's ex-assistant treasurer. She reached out through Judge's lawyer, and over coffee at a quiet diner 2 towns over, handed over a USB drive, 5 years of HOA financials. Her hand shook worse than Judge's as she spilled it. Linda forced her to fudge the books, threatening to snitch on her undocumented status if she didn't. Those records showed hundreds of thousands in shady cash deposits popping up after every accidental fire. I tell ya, my jaw hit the floor just hearing about it. Linda thought she'd burn Judge out, but she'd just lit the fuse on her own downfall, and Judge was holding the match. Lord Almighty, I couldn't sleep a wink watching Judge piece this mess together. She was up all night connecting dots, and let me tell ya, they lined up uglier than a mud fence. Turns out Linda's husband, Greg, didn't just retire from the police. He'd been the fire investigator on every suspicious blaze in their patch. Ruled them all accidents faster than you can say cover up. And the insurance companies shelled out millions based on his say-so. Judge's security cameras caught more than just the arsonists, too. They'd recorded weekly powwows at Linda's place with slimy real estate developers, all drooling over plans to slap luxury condos where our historic homes used to stand. One of them even bragged about bribing city officials to tweak zoning laws once they'd nabbed enough properties. Shady don't even cover it. Judge sniffed out Linda's playbook like a bloodhound. She'd target prime spots, especially historic gems like ours that couldn't be copied, hammer owners with HOA rules, then crank it up to vandalism and threats if they didn't budge. Next came the mysterious accidents, and her crew would swoop in, helping the poor saps by buying their wrecked homes for chump change. Late one night, Judge hit the jackpot in old county records. Linda had pulled this stunt before. 3 other historic neighborhoods in nearby counties got the same treatment. She'd roll in, form an HOA, drive out the holdouts, then flip the land to developers for millions. Get this, she'd even snagged community service awards for neighborhood improvement. The gall. The evidence was a slam dunk, but Judge wanted it airtight. She talked the FBI into wiring up that ex-treasurer for a sit-down with Linda. The tape. Pure gold. Linda crowing about her next targets, cracking jokes about which houses might have electrical issues, and threatening to make the treasurer vanish if she squealed. Every day, I'd see Linda strutting around like she owned the place, plotting her next move, while Judge built her case in the shadows. Every fake wave, every crocodile tear comment about Judge's tragic accident, all caught on record. That smugness was going to bury her. The clincher came when Judge dug up an old city map in the archives. Turns out my street, her house specifically, was smack in the path of a planned highway expansion. Linda's developer buddies had the inside scoop. Her property was the key to a shiny new shopping complex. They'd already scooped up the surrounding lots through shell companies, but without Judge's land, their multi-million-dollar dream was dead in the water. As Judge stacked her evidence for the FBI, Linda started squirming. She filed daily complaints about Judge's unsightly, burned-out lot, even pushed for a special HOA assessment to clean it up. Cash that'd go straight to her own pockets. Little did she know, every slimy move just made Judge's case stronger. Then came the big night. I stood outside the community center, heart thumping like a drum, watching Linda sashay in with her fancy coffee mug and a fat stack of papers. Tonight's HOA meeting was going to be a doozy. After 6 months of playing it cool, Judge was ready to drop the hammer. Through the window, I saw Linda setting up her PowerPoint, probably more fake violation pics and nonsense rules. Judge's hand shook just a touch as she brushed her judicial robes, folded neat in her briefcase. The FBI wire under a blazer was a reminder. This had to go perfect. The property at 247 Maple Street has been declared a public nuisance. Linda's voice boomed as Judge slipped in quiet-like. As per our emergency powers, we'll be moving forward with immediate redevelopment plans. A ripple of confused murmurs spread through the room. My neighbors, the good ones too scared to cross Linda, squirmed in their flimsy plastic chairs. Any objections? Linda smirked, scanning the crowd with those beady little eyes. No. Well then, let me show you our exciting plans for, I object, Mrs. Harrington. Judge's voice sliced through the air like a blade. Every head whipped toward the door. She strode down the center aisle, heels clicking on the linoleum, cool as ice. Linda's smirk flickered for a split second, but she rallied fast. Well, well, she sneered. Come to finally admit defeat? That burned-out wreck of a house is quite the eyesore. We're doing you a favor, really. She took a long, smug sip from her mug. Same look she had watching Judge's place go up in flames. Oh, honey, you've got no idea what's coming. Well, I nearly jumped out of my skin watching Judge take a stage at that HOA meeting. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a fat folder. Actually, she said, cool as a cucumber, I'm here to present some evidence of my own. She spread out a stack of photos across the table, security shots showing Linda and her goons creeping around her property the night of the fire. Interesting timing, don't you think? Linda's face twitched like she'd been zapped. Those could be anyone, she sputtered. And besides, you can't prove. Oh, but I can. Judge cut in, pulling out more papers. Bank records with shady payments to Linda's shell company after every distressed sale. Emails plotting to strong-arm non-members. And my personal favorite, texts about making that electrical fire look accidental. The room exploded in gasps and whispers. Linda's hand shook so bad, coffee sloshed over her mug, staining her precious table. This is ridiculous, she screeched. You can't just waltz in with these wild accusations. I'll sue you for defamation. That's when Judge reached into her briefcase, one last time, pulling out her judicial robes. The silk billowed like a superhero cape as she slipped them on. Federal Judge Sophia Ramirez, she announced, voice steady as steel, currently presiding over case number 2025 CR 142, United States versus Harrington et al., a RICO investigation into corruption, fraud, and criminal conspiracy. The blood drained from Linda's face faster than water down a drain. Her mug slipped, shattering on the floor, coffee splashing all over her designer shoes. She didn't even blink, just gaped like a fish on a hook. Right on cue, FBI agents busted through both doors, badges flashing. Linda's husband, Greg, that retired sergeant who'd buried all those fire reports, tried to bolt for the emergency exit. Didn't make it 3 steps before they tackled him like a linebacker. Judge strolled up to Linda, who'd flopped into her fancy president's chair like a rag doll. You know the biggest mistake criminals make, she said, picking up Linda's gavel, the same one she'd banged to doom Judge's house. They get so drunk on power, they forget to check who they're messing with. She tapped the gavel. Meeting adjourned. The click of handcuffs rang out as the FBI hauled Linda and her cronies away. My neighbors, folks who'd been scared silent for years, burst into applause. Old Mrs. Harrington from across the street hugged Judge, tears streaming. We should have helped you fight him, she whispered. Judge hugged her back, watching Linda get stuffed into a cop car. Sometimes, she said soft-like, justice takes the long road to get it right. Trial morning felt like a new dawn. I peeked out my window as Judge got ready, straightening her robes in her bathroom mirror. Linda had cackled when that house burned. Now she wasn't laughing. The courtroom was packed tighter than a can of sardines. Neighbors, reporters, even victims from other towns who'd crawled out of the woodwork after our story hit the news. Linda strutted in wearing some pricey suit instead of her yoga pants, but her face went whiter than a ghost when she saw Judge up on the bench. I swear I heard her hiss to her lawyer. That's her, the one whose house we burned. His pen hit the floor with a clatter. The evidence was a gut punch. Our investigation uncovered 15 other homes torched after saying no to Linda's HOA. Same old song. Harassment, vandalism, then fire. They'd snatched the burned-out lots for peanuts, through a shell company tied to Linda's brother-in-law. Millions in their pockets already. We rolled the security footage from Judge's cameras, and the whole room gasped. There was Linda and her HOA pals at 2 a.m., sloshing gasoline around those rose bushes like they were watering the lawn. Linda shook her head, mouthing no, as her own voice blared through the speakers. Once it burns, she'll have to sell. The real kicker? Greg flipped on her. That loyal ex-sergeant cracked under the weight of it all, spilling everything. How they picked targets, planned the fires, bribed officials to look the other way. Linda screamed liar, so loud the bailiff had to drag her out, kicking and clawing. Well, I'll be darned if that courtroom didn't turn into a full-on confessional. One by one, folks stood up to tell their tales, and each one hit like a freight train. Mrs. Alvarez, that sweet retired teacher, choked up talking about losing her family photos in a fire Linda's crew set. The Sharma family spoke about their granddad's ashes going up in smoke, irreplaceable, gone forever. With every story, Linda shrank smaller in her chair, that fancy designer suit doing nothing to hide the fear creeping up her face. When Judge read the verdict, her voice didn't waver one bit. 25 years for Linda, 15 for each of her bored cronies. Their jaws dropped, eyes wide. They finally got it. No pile of cash could buy their way out of justice. Linda tried to blabber some nonsense about protecting property values, but Judge shut her down cold. Same way Linda used to cut off her pleas about those roses. Poetic, ain't it? That was 6 months back. Now, I'm sitting here watching construction workers put the finishing touches on Judge's rebuilt Victorian. That purple trim? Spot on, just like her grandma painted it. The rose garden's blooming again, sprouted from cuttings off the one bush that survived Linda's poison. Linda's old place? Sold off to pay victim compensation. A lovely immigrant family moved in. Their kids run around the yard where Linda used to snap her snarky violation pics. Us neighbors ditched the HOA garbage and started a real community association, not some power trip club, but a group that actually helps each other. We throw block parties in Judge's garden now. Folks bring food, swap stories. Yesterday, Mrs. Alvarez showed up with her famous empanadas and these restored family photos her daughter salvaged from the wreckage. Tears in her eyes, but happy ones this time. Sometimes, when Judge is out tending her roses, people stop by, not to thank her for being a judge, but for standing up to bullies like Linda. The local news ran a follow-up piece about how we turned this neighborhood from Linda's reign of terror into a real community. They interviewed the Sharmas, who host our monthly meetups in their gorgeous backyard now. Judge keeps Linda's busted coffee mug, the one she dropped when the jig was up, on her desk at the courthouse. Says it reminds her justice moves slow but sure, just like her grandma always told her. And every morning, she sips her coffee in that rose garden, watching the sunrise glow through those perfect purple-trimmed windows. I reckon she's right. Sometimes the best revenge ain't about tearing someone down. It's about building something even prettier than what they tried to destroy. And you, where are you hearing this story? And have you ever gone against HOA? Would you like more stories about someone going against HOA? If your answer is yes, please like and subscribe to the channel so that YouTube can notify you every time we post another story on the channel.